What is ivermectin? Here are a few key points before we take a closer look. It was first discovered in 1973 and has been approved for human use since 1987, with more than 4 billion doses distributed worldwide. The World Health Organization has also included it on its list of essential medicines. And it's been called a wonder drug due to its versatility, safety profile, and beneficial impact it has had worldwide, earning a Nobel Prize to the two men who discovered and developed it. It's fascinating to note that ivermectin shares a very interesting trait with penicillin and aspirin in the fact that they were all found and derived from nature. But to truly understand ivermectin and its impact, we'll take it back to the very beginning. The full story of ivermectin begins with Satoshi Omura in the early 70s. Working as a microbiologist at the distinguished Kitasato Institute, he was searching for new antibacterial compounds. Having grown up in a farming family, he developed a deep respect for nature and believed, as he still does today, that it held all the things we need to have healthy and productive lives. Because of this, the Kitasato Institute was the perfect home for his research, having been founded by Shibasaburo Kitasato, who also believed in the discovery of drugs and vaccines derived from natural sources. That belief drove Professor Omura's purpose to discover useful chemicals and bioactive agents in nature, and more specifically in soil-dwelling organisms. He's collected thousands of soil samples from all over Japan to find and isolate these new microorganisms. One sample proved to be very promising. From soil that was taken very close to the Kawana Golf Club just a few hours south of Tokyo, Professor Omura and his team were able to isolate a new organism. Through a process of culturing and fermenting the organism, they soon found that it produced a very active class of compounds called ivermectins. All the right pieces were in place, as it was also during this time that Professor Omura and the Kitasato Institute had a partnership with the Merck, Sharp, and Dome Company, and all the resources they had in taking the compounds to the next level. It was 1975, and William Campbell was the head of an interdisciplinary team at the labs when they received the samples from the Kitasato Institute. It was his task to screen the sample along with 53 others sent by Professor Omura's team. The ivermectin was highly effective against worms and other parasites. They then modified it to be safer and more effective. That result was ivermectin. They have since searched the world over for the microorganisms that produced those original ivermectins. Quite remarkably, that sample site south of Tokyo remains the only place they've ever been found. An astounding fact considering the global impact the drug has had. In the time after isolating and screening the new ivermectins, further analysis revealed the efficacy against a diverse range of parasitic worms and insects. In fact, they found it to be 25 times more potent than other antiparasitic drugs. It was also the first drug in a new class that could treat parasites both internally and externally, called endectocides. In 1981, ivermectin was released commercially to treat animals and quickly became the top-selling veterinary drug in the world, used in both domestic animals and livestock. It was so effective, it nearly eradicated a roundworm commonly found in horses. But the goal was always a drug that could treat both animals and humans, so the work didn't end there. William Campbell pushed forward on more studies to see if ivermectin could be used against onchocerciasis, also known as river blindness, after finding that a close relative to the worm that caused river blindness was very effectively killed in horses. River blindness is caused by Onchocerca volvulus, a parasitic worm that can live in the body for up to 14 years. It's spread through the bite of infected black flies that carry the tiny worms in larval form from person to person. Aside from blindness, they also cause severe skin issues and intense itching, as well as being generally debilitating. In fact, in the West African savanna, half the males over 40 years of age were blind due to onchocerciasis. In 1981, Merck began clinical trials in Senegal. Safety was a top priority, so they began with a very small dose of ivermectin. River blindness was a massive health emergency, as well as a socioeconomic issue, and they were set on addressing it effectively with ivermectin. They found that a single annual dose would reduce those immature worms to zero. Ivermectin could then be taken annually for the life of the adult worm and prevent all the devastating effects of infection, including the blindness that was disabling so many. In 1987, Merck registered ivermectin for human use under the brand name of Mectizan. What followed was a great nod to George Merck's philosophy on medicine.
Merck and Company is an industrial firm, but in the conduct of our business, we have endeavored to live up to certain principles. We try to remember that medicine is for the patient. We try never to forget that medicine is for the people. It is not only for the profits.
They established the Mectizan donation program and began distributing ivermectin at no cost for the treatment of onchocerciasis, committed to continue their distribution for as long as needed and wherever needed. Ivermectin has proven equally effective in another devastating parasitic disease known as elephantiasis. To date, over 30 years later, more than 4 billion treatments have been donated in 49 countries for combined treatment against river blindness and elephantiasis. A component to the large ongoing distribution is the safety profile of ivermectin. In fact, the WHO concluded that ivermectin was so safe that with some training, non-medical people could oversee their community's ongoing administering of the drug. In 2015, Professor Satoshi Omura and William Campbell received a proper acknowledgement for their discovery of ivermectins and the impact ivermectin has had all over the world. They were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine.
In the spaces of physiology or medicine, the ultimate goal is to achieve scientific breakthroughs that change our view of human health, disease, and normal vital processes.
From more than 40,000 different Streptomyces cultures, he was able to identify a completely unknown type, Streptomyces ivermectilis, that contained a compound never seen before and which would change the history of medicine. William C. Campbell received the Streptomyces strain from Omura and identified the unique properties of Streptomyces ivermectilis in killing many different intestinal nematodes with extraordinary potency. Given the efficacy of ivermectin, global initiatives sponsored by WHO and NGOs have the goal now to eliminating these two diseases by 2025.
The story of ivermectin has been an incredibly positive and impactful one, with worldwide recognition of its benefits to humanity over the decades of safe and widespread use. In 2019, the world changed. And today, in 2021, we're still living and dealing with the virus that locked the world down. In reality, COVID-19 may be the only reason many even know of ivermectin. The name has been mentioned and written thousands of times during the pandemic. Now you've seen the origins, use, safety, and benefit to millions around the world. The fact is, new potential uses for ivermectin had been studied before COVID-19 stopped the world in its tracks. Aside from its antiparasitic effects, studies have shown antiviral and anti-inflammatory mechanisms of action. And as drugs are commonly repurposed after research proves efficacy and safety, this was promising for many areas of use for ivermectin. Studies have shown effectiveness against influenza, Zika virus, dengue fever, malaria, tuberculosis, leukemia, HIV, and more. It's a drug whose full scope of use is only now becoming to be understood. COVID was a global health emergency, and this prompted many doctors and researchers to investigate existing and established drugs to repurpose, placing even more attention and broad worldwide research into ivermectin's potential uses. And due to its mechanism of action as an antiviral, it could be useful across future viruses and mutations. The story of ivermectin is far from over. In fact, it's only just beginning, as acceptance of this drug and all its uses begin to be understood. That singular sample of soil and the microorganism discovered within has proven to be endlessly giving.
Dr. Mangawal, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, where are we going to now? Praise the Lord. We want to thank, it's wonderful to be on this beautiful forum. Overcoming the Pandemic Part 3. Is early treatment the answer? And we want to thank God for all who are here. I want to greet my one of our co-hosts, Mrs. Migdal, from all the way from Australia. I believe it's about 10 a.m. in Australia right now, and it's Saturday night here in in much of the rest of the world. So good morning and good night to everyone, and it's good to see Dr. George Fareed on well. I just want to open in a quick word of prayer. We're going to share with you concerning what's coming up. Heavenly Father, we want to thank you and praise you for an opportunity to minister and to share the truths concerning early treatment protocols, how vital it is and how many lives it can save. The lives of many of the human population of this earth are hanging in the balance. We want to thank you, Lord, that we have a lineup of really credible experts who are coming to share their knowledge with us and buttress us and strengthen us, Lord, for what is in the face of what is happening. So we commit this entire program. We pray that there just be a free flow of information. People will be strengthened and edified in a very special way. We give you all the praise, honor, and glory. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. Well, I couldn't resist that. Being a senior pastor, which I wanted to just the meeting in prayer. And there's Sherwin. And I can't say how overjoyed I am.
Good night, everyone. Dr. Fareed,
Eva.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Good to meet you all. Yeah.
Hi, Eva. Good to see you.
Yes.
Hey, George. Good morning.
Good evening or good afternoon here in California. Thank you.
Amen. So I'm gonna just Dr. George Fareed, and then I'm gonna turn over to Sherwin to do the official introduction. I want to say this before I do that. Dr. Fareed, Sherwin has been trying to have you on these broadcasts for quite a while, so it's a real victory just to have you sit, and we look forward to what you're going to be presenting. And so, what I know of you from Sherwin is that you are one of the leading clinicians in terms of treating COVID. You have had a tremendous success rate in terms of treating people within the first 5 days of the infection. In fact, I am told that you have treated over 7,000 people and caught them once you've caught them within the first 5 days of the infection, you have not lost a patient. And so I will be sitting at your feet tonight, looking forward to hearing from you and all that you have to share with us. So at this point, I want to turn over to Sherwin. It's good to have Sherwin on camera. Amen. And I'm going to turn over to him and ask him to just introduce Dr. Fareed formally.
Yes, good night, everyone, and welcome Dr. George Fareed. Dr. Fareed is a well-known MD now in the world. You know, he's a leader in the field of early outpatient treatment for COVID-19. I'll let him say a bit about himself, but what I really admire about Dr. Fareed, he was retired and he came back out in the fight to help save lives, right? And Dr. Fareed, I'll let you say a little bit about yourself, and then I'll speak a little bit about Eva.
Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be with you all. And I've never retired, and I don't intend to retire. Perhaps in 20 years or 25, I'll retire. But
You should probably let them know how old you are right now.
I'm 77, so I have another 20, 25 years left in me.
Right,
And,
good. A young 77.
Well, I appreciate you saying that.
Yes.
In any case, I've been honored to be on the front line here in Southern California in the Imperial Valley. I'm a doctor trained at Harvard and on the faculty at Harvard and UCLA, and then 31 years ago went into family medicine in a rural, underserved area. And I immediately took on the HIV problems and epidemic, and we established a clinic here, and I continue to see the HIV patients in addition to doing general medicine and all aspects of both inpatient and outpatient care. And then it was natural for me to work with my colleague, Brian Tyson, who's an amazing hero in the pandemic, who had a urgent care center that I would help out in. And immediately he and I used a protocol with hydroxychloroquine based upon the work of Raul and Zelenko. And on the early studies, it had showed efficacy for hydroxychloroquine as an antiviral agent. And I'll talk a bit about these agents like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine in terms of how they actually molecularly trigger the inhibition of the virus through bolstering and affecting host cell mechanisms. But I don't want to be too wordy right now. I just wanted to indicate I'm in general family practice, but have collaborated with an incredible doctor named Brian Tyson. And so what I say is speaking for the two of us in our effort to provide early treatment. And we saw that working from the beginning of the pandemic. And so we never stopped because it was so effective in high-risk people, protecting them from succumbing to the condition, the viral later stages, and ending up hospitalized. And then I would see them in the hospital too, and that was made a tremendous impact on me as the suffering that went on if they had the bad luck of ending up being hospitalized, and they still are being hospitalized because of a lack of knowledge of well-known, making it well known that early treatment is the should be the standard of care and be offered right away for all over the United States and all over the world.
Great, that's great. Thank you, Dr. Farid. But before you do your presentation, I'll just let Eva just say a little bit about herself. Eva is way down in Melbourne, Australia, and has been one of my mentors, actually, I would say, in this whole fight back and push back. And she has inspired me and many others in terms of, bringing early treatment information to people around the world. Eva, let's hear a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Showan. Well, I was very inspired by Dr. Farid, who I met on Clubhouse. My background, I was a physiotherapist and an educator, and I've studied environmental science and systems, and I'm also a health educator. And I just got very frustrated at the very beginning because I could see that there was all this early treatment knowledge emerging early on in the pandemic, and was trying to support people that were trying to get the message out there, and found myself on Clubhouse back in, I guess, March, April, and this year, and that's changed a lot of things because there was been an international group and people like Showan and Dr. Farid and Karen and Bruce and people from all around the world started working on early treatment rooms, and Dr. Farid would come on and just speak, and he would speak in a way where everyone would listen, because he's such a compassionate and caring and gentle soul. So it's been really hard work here in Australia, where we have bans on both ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. So we're really hamstrung, and it's really important that people understand the evidence, because the evidence is not allowed to be shared on our media here. and that started already last year. In the middle of last year, we already had that happening. So yeah, thank you for putting this together, Sherwin.
Thank you, Eva. I'll hand over back to Dr. Farid. Dr. Farid, do you want to get your slides up now?
Yeah, sure. I'll speak as they're being shown, Sherwin. Thank you. There are just a series of slides that I've put together that reflects how we approached the treatment, early treatment, and we carried forward with the use of inexpensive generic repurposed medications that are used off-label, and they were, as I was saying in the beginning, the use of hydroxychloroquine was very, very effective and still remains very effective in a combined treatment that I'll describe. And they should never have been stigmatized or suppressed. And the drugs that are there in the United States, the FDA gives approval to use off-label agents that are approved for other purposes. And hydroxychloroquine is approved and well known in terms of very great safety and efficacy for other ill conditions, for malaria treatment and prevention, for rheumatoid arthritis, and for lupus erythematosus, autoimmune diseases, and a few other conditions. But those are the area uses that were well established for over 50 to 60 years around the world. In any case, when we selected that, we based our approach on the work of, as I mentioned, Raoult in France and Vladimir Zelenko in Upper New York, where they had been using this agent in combination with azithromycin and Zelenko adding in zinc, which we found very important. And they were getting good results with high-risk patients, and data was there that everyone could see. And we were shocked that we were being suppressed in our recommendation and use of this agent. And it still is suppressed, actually not officially recognized by the FDA in the United States or the NIH, when they could have easily just recommended doing letting groups like ours and others use an agent in an effective way, safe way, in the early period, in the first 5 to 7 days of the infection, when you can inhibit with this combination the multiplication of the virus, and thus allow the individual to then develop their host responses to completely suppress the infection. So that one highlighted sentence, one reason that off-label is that there may not be an approved drug to treat the disease or medical condition, and that has been the case, or was the case. Now we have approved monoclonal antibodies that are very valuable to use, and we use them in conjunction with the cocktail of oral medications to get complete recovery for patients, and particularly high-risk patients. And there will be some approved agents from pharmaceutical companies in the very near future that will be viral-directed. The Pfizer product is a protease inhibitor, 3CL protease inhibitor for coronavirus, much like protease inhibitors are for HIV treatment, but they're virus-directed, so the resistance can occur through mutation if in patient populations. Our agents, and I'll go on to discuss the ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine as cellular-based or host-based agents that are not readily developed resistance to by a highly mutable virus. Could I have the next slide? Thank you. You can just change the slider. I don't know if I can control the slides. Oh, yeah, thank you. And so I'm going to go into what we were led to use and became part of a big group. And this is a very historic article that Peter McCullough wrote up with, and it kindly included people like myself and Brian Tyson and many others as co-authors, including Vladimir Zelenko, on what's called multifaceted, highly targeted sequential multi-drug treatment of early ambulatory high-risk SARS-CoV-2 infection, or COVID-19. So that's an article that's should have been highly recognized and supported when it was published in December of 2020. And it really didn't get the backing that it should have had internationally and nationally. The next slide. That's it. And I'm going to jump into this a little bit ahead, but this is the algorithm that is followed by people like myself, which is a sequenced multi-drug therapy. And this shows the plan for that again was beautifully presented in that paper that I just showed you the title of, with the patients started on simple measures to improve their state, basically their health, and then dividing patients into patients with high risk versus low risk. But at this stage, and that's age less than 50, age greater than 50, with or without comorbidities, and then adding in to almost everyone the nutraceutical bundle, zinc, vitamin D3, vitamin C, quercetin if it's available, and aspirin, an anticoagulant, is an integral part. And for most of the patients now, if in the United States, if they are able to have access to an infusion center or an emergency room and are symptomatic, they can receive very quickly the monoclonal antibody infusion. That's from 3 different sources: Eli Lilly, Regeneron, or Glaxo. And they're all very beneficial in neutralizing circulating virus. But then in addition, and for our work that I'll talk about with Brian Tyson, for 10 to 14 months, we didn't have monoclonal antibodies. We had only these repurposed medications or generic agents. And those were hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, fluvoxamine became also a beneficial agent and that also had a specific inhibitory intracellular effect action that blocked COVID-19 replication. And then outside of the United States, favipiravir, a polymerase inhibitor that's approved outside of the United States. We don't have that in the United States as yet, but we were very successful with our protocol with hydroxychloroquine for 8 or 10 months, and then adding in ivermectin when it clearly was effective. And thus we had a multi-drug cocktail, and much analogous to what we do with HIV treatment. We use multiple agents to effectively suppress the multiplication of the HIV virus and avoid resistance forming if only a single agent is used, or not a complete suppression of multiplication. The same is necessary with COVID-19. It's a very mutagenic, mutable virus, RNA virus, and most of them are in that category. Most of the other coronaviruses and many RNA viruses are comparable in terms of mutability, and it's for that reason vaccines are not well generated for them, because they can develop resistance. In any case, as one goes through the algorithm, one adds in, if needed, for respiratory symptoms, inhaled budesonide and corticosteroids, particularly prednisone or dexamethasone, and adds in colchicine, an anti-inflammatory agent that has had trials to show it is efficacious later as an anti-inflammatory. And if, by the way, if anyone wants to interrupt me at any time, please do so. So that's, we try to, as I've stated, use aspirin right away in the treatment for all patients started on our regimen, just to protect against hypercoagulability and blood clots, or add in other agents that are more effective anticoagulants like apixaban and rivaroxaban and others in that category. Let's go to the next slide, if you don't mind. So
I have a question. Given that in Australia that there's a ban on both ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine to use in general, how could they be replaced? Any thoughts looking at that flow chart? What would you do to replace those treatments?
Good question. Well, I would replace them with the agents that, such as fluvoxamine would be a great agent to use unless it's banned. That's by itself, it can be used with the azithromycin or doxycycline and the zinc and vitamin D3, the other components of the nutraceutical bundle. It's just criminal and so cruel that they would have any action of banning, as they do in other Western European countries, of hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, not making them available. They're so effective, and there's so much science showing how they work and how effective they've been in nationwide studies and in observational studies, such as the one that we have completed here in the Imperial Valley. So that's I would recommend employing other agents, and fluvoxamine comes to my mind as the most worthwhile when a 5-day treatment with 25 to 50 milligrams of fluvoxamine twice a day in conjunction with the other agents that are there. Quercetin can be an option. I don't think it's nearly as effective as fluvoxamine, and it's certainly not as beneficial or effective as HCQ or IVM. And there may be others that would be available, and one should try to pick the more famotidine or Pepcid. It seems to have also a beneficial antiviral action when used with vitamin D. And that would be another part of what I would recommend in Australia if one had to offer an early treatment. So, good question. Great question. So this is a slide that just tries to dramatically show what the effects are if in comparing mortality and hospitalization benefits. And if on the left side, if one is just doing home quarantining while they're acutely ill and using contagion control and lockdowns, there's a really high percentage of individuals that will have morbidity and mortality, be hospitalized. But when one introduces the multifaceted, highly targeted multi-drug therapy, when that gets a dramatic reduction in hospitalization and mortality, and particularly in the high-risk population, and it can be extended into the hospital care period unless there are rigid protocols that are required in hospitals that require using remdesivir and dexamethasone to start off with. And that's been a problem that I've seen in our hospitals locally where I work, and also have seen nationally here in the United States, that they put so much backing of agents and approaches that were not able to succeed, but particularly this medication remdesivir that was the main drug pushed forward by Fauci in the United States, and it still is being used, and not with great efficacy, unfortunately, and sets the patient back in the hospital. But in any case, the purpose of this slide is just to emphasize the institution of the early treatment, targeted treatment with multiple agents, such as IVM and HCQ together, as we prefer, results in a very low hospitalization and mortality. And, the next slide, please. And this is a slide that Peter McCullough created originally, and it shows the pillars of pandemia, and it shows contagion control on the left, and then early home treatment, and then later it's hospitalization. And the fourth pillar is the last pillar, and that's vaccination and herd immunity achievement. Herd immunity is being achieved through natural infections being increased in percentages. The vaccinations that have been used are with these products that generate a high resistance, unfortunately, and high incidence of breakthrough infections, so that they haven't achieved herd immunity. But the pillar number 2, early home treatment, with telemedicine helping and trying to avoid hospitalization and death, of course, it is the top priority, should have been the top priority internationally. And we went to international summits to try to get this properly communicated. One was in Rome that I participated in September, and there was tremendous support and agreement by doctors from around many countries around the world that this had succeeded, and it's something that that should have, all the health agencies should have been bringing in groups of doctors that were competent in this area of outpatient care and providing it as the in terms of the standard of care widely. So the next slide. That's an interesting slide, though, that Peter McCullough made, and is good to look at. This is the actual pathophysiology of COVID-19. It shows the early viral replication phase, and that's the period where it can be attacked and effectively treated. And that's where our approach is most beneficial. Ours can be added in later, up to 10 to 14 days with benefit. But once one gets into the later period of 10 to 14 days, there is the cytokine storm occurring with tremendous inflammation occurring, and particularly pulmonary manifestations of COVID pneumonia. And then as the condition progresses further, the fatal outcomes occur because of hypercoagulability and thrombosis elicited from the primarily from the spike protein activity of COVID-19, but in microvasculature. And that's what needs to be treated in the hospital very intensively.
Can I ask a question? At what point did they start to understand the hemagglutination problem? Because I guess that changed how treatment proceeded, didn't it?
Yeah, it was months into the pandemic before that was appreciated, when the patients manifested major thromboses, deep vein thromboses and pulmonary emboli. And then it was subsequently appreciated, particularly in postmortem evaluations of the extensive microthrombi that were forming in various organs of the body, in the liver, in the lungs and kidneys and brain. So it's a matter of this being a thromboembolism, systemic thromboembolism, but on a microvascular level, in addition to the major thromboses in the major venous systems.
Did you change your treatment at that point, or were you already including things that could have that anti-thrombotic impact?
Well, we changed it at that point. We weren't addressing it initially in the first few months. And fortunately, if you do treat within the first 5 to 7 days or 3 to 5 days as early as possible, you don't develop and progress into that condition. So that's a very good question. These were insights that came from the leading doctors treating inpatient care that are throughout the world, actually.
Dr. Farid, I have a question as well. I think this slide is a very good illustration as to why it's very important to treat within at least the first 7 days. Typically when they're tested and then sent home with no treatment or not told what to do. So by the time in some countries, by the time they get a test back, it could be several days, and they could potentially be within this zone here already, or even later, right?
Yes.
And yeah, and I think that's one of the problems we face in where we deal with issues too late, and people end up being hospitalized and sometimes dying.
Right. Pertinent, and that's where the FLCCC that Pierre Corey and Merrick have made major discoveries of how to contain that in the with the anti-androgen therapies and the high dose steroid therapy. But that's it's very challenging to overcome this when it occurs, and it also requires continuing using agents that have novel mechanisms of action, like ivermectin, that can block some aspects of pulmonary stiffening, or still relax the lungs in a novel way that isn't completely appreciated, but does turn it around along with the other treatments, or even fluvoxamine, which has benefits a little bit later in the timetable for the progression.
So you probably know that here in Australia that the recommendation is to do nothing, to take Panadol, and when you feel that if you feel that you have troubles breathing, then you go to the hospital. Mm-hmm. And so there's obviously huge frustration from it's actually just a handful of doctors who are openly talking about this here in Australia because they risk their license, and we have a very aggressive regulatory system around this. And we did have ivermectin was being used off-label, and there's even a study that was reported on 600 patients in New South Wales and Sydney, successfully treated with the triple therapy that Dr. Sabine Hazan has been using highly successfully, and she's doing the FDA trial on that at the moment. And then they went and blocked it several weeks ago, and that was a shock to everyone. And it's really for people here in Victoria who knew about this and they've read the research. There's now that situation where doctors are banned from prescribing these drugs. And I think the hydroxychloroquine wasn't really, it wasn't an issue because ivermectin came along, but that this has happened is very beyond frustrating. And I don't know if you know today, the story about Dr. Andrew Hill has been published in Kennedy's book. So it sort of outlines how ivermectin, wasn't approved in terms of its research base. And it's very interesting to read that because it's got the transcript of Dr. Hill speaking to Tess Lowry about the reasons that it wasn't approved at the time through the WHO. So it's interesting the politics behind why we don't have any treatments, early treatments here at the moment.
Well, it's the same thing in Trinidad as well. Sorry.
Sorry?
Yeah, I mean the same sort of treatment is here in Trinidad as well, where they just probably tell you Panadol or nothing at all. So I think the whole reason for this conference and this sort of seminar really is to educate not only the general populace but also doctors as well that there are treatments available that are being used around the world by people like yourself and Tyson, and many others.
And I guess the research is all coming out, isn't it, in your new book? Are you going to talk about your book soon?
Oh yeah, I shall in a few minutes. Okay. But I'd like to just say that it's inexplicable that agencies would block safe medications to be used if the doctor feels they can be beneficial, and if there's such a great deal of evidence to show they are effective, and that there's some other entities or forces involved here that are in play that go beyond just the these bureaucrats who are dictating what's going on, what isn't able to be done, I should say. And so I think the Kennedy book is very enlightening and very accurate. And I'll talk about our book, which will be a complement to Kennedy's book on that's called The Real Anthony Fauci. And I would say that in places like Australia, where there haven't been major outbreaks, they can get by with this dictum of don't do anything. Yet that's what they did in the United States, and they kept it going for months and months. But we just kept going with treatment because we can't let people suffer and end up agonizing on ventilators and succumbing and being in tremendous fear. It's really not a very frightening illness if one knows that it's treatable and amenable to these simple agents that are so remarkably effective. So that and we're adding to them, so we aren't going to have our hands tied, and they shouldn't have the hands tied anywhere in the world. It's really despicable and criminal, and it's anti-science, and it's a disgrace in medicine that is occurring. Could we go on to the next slide? I'm sorry.
It's interesting. We're seeing a lot of creativity, aren't we, though, because there's different viral, antiviral, anti-inflammatory, and anticoagulation regimes in the different protocols around the world. So you're seeing a lot of interesting science emerge.
You really are. Yeah, it's very educational, actually. And when we started back a year and a half ago with our treatment, we didn't really understand the mechanism of action of our agents yet, and particularly HCQ. And HCQ is effective for prophylaxis, just like it is for malaria prophylaxis. I took it throughout the pandemic, and I was very vulnerable and never contracted COVID-19. It's taken weekly, 200 to 400 400 milligrams once a week is what I would recommend for people. And it could have been used widely throughout the world for prophylaxis. It should have been. And it would reduce, as it mentioned here in the highlighted area, the spread of SARS-CoV-2 and decrease the incidence of cases and viral loads tremendously. And then in the multi-drug treatment regimens, we now know that one of the two major mechanisms of HCQ for its anti-COVID action is through as Zelenko would say, it's the gun and zinc is the bullet. It's an ionophore bringing zinc intracellular in effective ways. And that is very potent inhibitor of the RNA polymerase of COVID-19. But even more importantly, it's a agonist of the sigma-1 receptor intracellular, which is when it's blocked, the COVID-19 proteins aren't able to be folded in the right conformation. And that probably is the major mechanism of its inhibition of COVID-19 replication. Fluvoxamine and Prozac, other agents are very potent as in sigma-1 receptor agonism too. And that's probably why they are effective anti-COVID action and anti-COVID efficacy, I should say. But so in our the 296 studies that are mentioned in this paper by Peter McCullough and Harvey Reish, and 264 peer-reviewed studies, actually, the HCQ-based multi-drug regimens have resulted in marked reduction in the risk of death, of hospitalization, and we were seeing in our own clinics, Brian Tyson and myself in particular, improvement resolution within 24 hours of initiating therapy. And then in patients that were later in starting on the regimen, it would be 2 to 3 days, but they would progressively clear the virus, and then be able to return to their normal activities and lives and family activities without spreading the infection as much as a person that was left untreated would do. So that's on HCQ, and there's some very good studies that show how the agent has an action on the ACE2 receptor, sialic acid modification that inhibits binding of COVID-19 to its receptor, but particularly intracellular, how it inhibits and without being toxic to the host or the patient, the multiplication of COVID-19. And one of the main mechanisms could very well be this zinc ionophore mechanism. Other agents have that zinc ionophore action too, and ivermectin does weakly act as an ionophore for zinc, as does famotidine or Pepsid and vitamin D. The next slide.
Sorry, Dr. Farid, could you explain to our audience what you mean by ionophore?
Well, that's a molecule that will facilitate the passage of a metal like zinc through the cell membrane. Zinc is the ion, and the ionophore, like HCQ, is able to be passage through the cell membrane readily. It doesn't have a cell membrane of prevention or obstruction, and so it carries the zinc in, and once it's intracellular, it has its action in terms of inhibiting the RNA polymerase.
So zinc is really an important part of the whole protocol.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
In any of the hydroxychloroquine research that was done, did they not use zinc? I mean,
that's right. Yeah, good point. The initial protocol of Raoult, Didier Raoult in Marseille, did not include zinc, and many other studies and programs in other countries or other parts of the other places in the United States did not utilize zinc, and many of them were still very effective if the HCQ was dosed properly and administered in that very early period of the infection. But it seems to be much more effective when zinc is part of the protocol.
Interestingly, in Melbourne, you can actually get hydroxychloroquine as part of a study that was approved, I think, back in March or April 2020. So you can get 2 hydroxychloroquine tablets from Karen Reid, Dr. Karen Reid at the NIH in NIMM in Hawthorne, because they're doing a study on it. But you only get 2 tablets, as well as D and zinc and doxycycline, or one of the antibiotics as well. So that's still running. So, but the dosage is very low.
Oh, that's homeopathic. That's an insignificant amount of not able to be likely beneficial. In that you do have to do a loading of HCQ. We found from Raoult's work, we felt that using a higher level actually than just the standard 200 milligrams twice a day that's the standard of therapy dosing for general purposes in the specific early treatment of COVID-19, higher dosing is needed to build up the level and the intracellular level of the HCQ and circulating level for it to be effective.
I think we had something like 1,118 kilograms of hydroxychloroquine destroyed about a month ago, because it was sitting on the port and was brought in at the beginning of the pandemic. One of our billionaires donated 32 million dosages to the government, and there was some that was delivered and was sitting on the dock after it was banned. And I think this part of it, this dose, these 5 million dosages were sent off for destruction recently.
how shocking! How shocking! And actually, we had the experience of a stockpile of HCQ that was acquired by our government in March of 2020, when it was felt that it could be beneficial, and it was never released, and it's still 60. I'm not sure how many thousand doses are there, but a huge stockpile.
Yeah.
And it's there can be shortages in pharmacies, unfortunately. This is a rather technical slide that is illustrative of what's known in terms of on the molecular level for ivermectin. And it's really fascinating that a molecule that, as your beautiful video at the beginning today illustrated, that the groundbreaking and humanity-saving benefits of ivermectin for parasitic infections, but the mechanisms may be different. But there good science showing that the ivermectin docks on the receptor for the spike protein, the ACE2 receptor, as a mechanism of action. That blocks the attachment of the virus to a respiratory epithelial cell, but then intracellularly it actually blocks and binds to a transporter protein called IMP alpha, I believe, or in any case, it's in the bottom panel C on the right. That is critically important for the viral proteins to be transported intranuclearly. Even though the replication is primarily in the cytoplasm, there are some nuclear steps involved that are required for COVID-19 to be to multiply and complete its replication, and ivermectin blocks that. And if these studies are in reputable journals, and they're very high caliber studies that give us an understanding of why this is so effective, in addition to its other actions that are not shown here, that affect later in the cytokine storm and respiratory failure state of COVID-19. But here these are steps that block multiplication. And I used to be involved in molecular biology and molecular virology many, many years ago in academia in UCLA at Harvard Medical School. And it's something that I appreciate, but unfortunately, I can't completely explain it to you now, but I just wanted to emphasize that there's a real good science about how these work, and it'll be comparable to, it should have been applauded and provided support for the backing of this agent, as well as and comparable information on the molecular level for HCQs, that they should have been out there and made use of to prevent the mass casualties that we saw throughout the world and still seeing, unfortunately. And they're collateral damage that is unacceptable. You can't, with agents that were effective, we wouldn't have been into mRNA and DNA virus vaccines at this stage, probably, because we would have stamped out the pandemic in its inception if we'd taken this approach. So I think it's good to keep in mind that if one wants to look at these studies, the references are there on this slide. I think is there another one there? No, not sure what that one is. So let me just finish up by going into what we've done with my colleague Brian Tyson, and we've had collaboration with Matthew Crawford, a very distinguished biostatistician, and these are collaborators from the clinic. What isn't shown and wasn't analyzed were 2 to 4,000 or 3,000 patients that I've treated outside of the urgent care clinic. But in any case, this is a study that we've tried to get published that is an observational study that is analyzed statistically, and it's of 4,376 COVID patients given early ambulatory medical and supportive care. And it brings out the philosophy that Brian Tyson is a champion of doing complete evaluations right at the beginning, and then initiating therapy even before the positive diagnosis has been obtained on a PCR test. But starting because of symptomatology, and then continuing the therapy with the confirmation that one gets, and then bringing patients back in or following them up with telemedicine every 2 to 4 days to verify that they're understanding their treatment and responding to it, and bringing them back in for x-rays of the chest and evaluations that might require then intensification of the treatment. And that's been particularly important for the Delta variant, to intensify, because it's more aggressive than the primary variant was. But these are patients that were part of our program at the All Valley Urgent Care Clinic, and mainly Brian Tyson's clinic, as I mentioned. I'm not sure what that slide is, but out of the next slide, which may, or skip one slide, if you could just go to the next, unless you have a question. The protocols that we used were for the 8 or 9 months initially, HCQ as the antiviral agent with either azithromycin or doxycycline. These two antibiotics are intracellular antibiotics, and they have weak antiviral action that was never really exploited in the past, but they do help ward off secondary bacterial or mycoplasmal infections that patients might be susceptible to, but they also are synergistic with the HCQ and subsequently ivermectin, and then aspirin, the multivitamin pack, as I mentioned, and then selectively utilizing inhaled budesonide and prednisone or dexamethasone and colchicine, as well as periactin or cyproheptadine, and then, if needed, fluvoxamine in the treatment regimen. And so in the study that is in the paper, protocol 1 is that, and then protocol 2 later in November of last year, October, November, we added in ivermectin along with the HCQ concurrently at 15 to 21 milligrams daily for 3 to 5 days. And that was very well tolerated. And it's we would then, at the end of the year, in a small number of patients in this paper, probably 10 or 12 included those that received monoclonal antibody infusion early on. And the next slide is the summary of results. I think that, and in that observational study, we compared our results to those in our community, our county, and there was a dramatic difference in terms of the percentage of patients that succumbed to COVID-19, and none died, as compared to 3% in a county, 2.25% risk adjusted in the same county and time period. And unfortunately, our county was like other parts of the country where the majority of doctors were following the guidelines of the NIH and FDA to not offer early treatment and to wait for hospitalization to initiate treatments. And the ERs were sending patients back out to the home, their community, without any early treatment when they present early but not qualify for admission. And then in our studies of 3,962 patients, 0.05% were hospitalized, as compared to 20.76% of the risk-adjusted population in the community. And if one went beyond our area, it would be virtually the same, looking at LA County or other metropolitan areas where doctors were following the guidelines that exist in Australia, unfortunately, of no treatment. And it's just so we hope that we've been trying to get this paper published. We are actually, Matthew Crawford has written a phenomenal chapter bringing with our full paper in the book that you were referring to, Eva. And the book is it's entitled Overcoming the COVID Darkness, how 2 doctors successfully treated 7,000 patients, by Brian Tyson and myself, with the chapter of biostatistical analysis of this paper and observations relating to the problems that have occurred in getting papers published by Matthew Crawford. And then we have a lot of testimonials in the paper, in the book, that are, and also we describe the work from a charity that was set up where when we treat patients outside of our area, they ask if they can pay me for our work and treating. And then I say, please donate to our C19 project at what's called the Trinity Baptist Church in Hopeville, a little farming town nearby. And they've donated there. And through those donations, the pastor and his staff have purchased the protocol and given it out to indigent people in the valleys here, the Coachella Valley and Mexicali Valley and far beyond. So we've reached, and he told me today, actually there's a gathering at the church tonight to recognize what has been done, that my wife and I will be going to in an hour or so. But in any case, he was telling me today that the numbers are approaching 3,000 that have been benefited, just as a consequence of the patients giving back when they've recovered. And we've had some very generous people that have helped allow this to make an impact.
Dr.
Wow.
Farid, I have a question. I have a question. I mean, given the success that you have had in your area, are other clinics nearby or within California, are they looking at that success to try and replicate it? And if not, why? Is it because of the NIH only, or is it because of intimidation, or is it financially based? What do you think?
Well, it's a good question. I think it's a matter of determination to do something that based upon what you see. And we saw that needed right at the beginning. Other doctors were really highly stigmatized by falsification of data on HCQ, of not really giving credence to these groups like the Didier Raoult group in Marseille and Vladimir Zelenko in Upper New York State, that were so positive, and that it was so easy for people to just fall back on their major institutions or agencies like the FDA and Fauci and AMA and many other agencies that and then the falsification that came out by criminal falsification that was published in the Lancet and New England Journal of Medicine on the dangers of hydroxychloroquine. And it was in that time in June of 2020, May, June, that we were getting such great success, but working very hard. And then this gave momentum to the false approach of doing nothing, and certainly not using making people fearful of hydroxychloroquine. That should never have happened. And so when doctors went along with that, it became until the agencies do give support for it, and there be a education of the importance of early treatment, even without ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, they'll just be content with not not doing anything, and not and they'd have to, if they did turn around and join in, I think they'd have to realize that they made a big mistake in the months and year period of time when they could have been treating.
It's a very, very hard thing to admit. And I remember what happened here in Australia, where they were referring to late studies. So it was always referencing late studies without actually being specific that that's what they were talking about. And there was no reference to early studies and the data from that. And it's lucky that we now have the website C19study.com, which has put together all the research on all early treatments, in fact, all treatments for COVID, so that people have an opportunity to really look at the data themselves if they can understand it. It's very frustrating to see what's happening. How did bureaucrats take over the treatment of COVID instead of people that are doctoring like yourself at the front line?
So, Eva, I forgot, what was the first part of that question? How did
bureaucrats, like it seems that the decision making for a lot of what's happening isn't actually coming from doctors on the front line like yourself who are responding, and it goes back into this, there's no RCT, or the RCT isn't, it's underpowered, or there's many scientists and doctors like yourself who are very frustrated. Even Dr. Eli Schwartz in Israel, who did a randomized double-blind controlled trial, was having difficulties having his ivermectin study published. And I'm just, curious, how did that shift happen? Is that new?
Well, that's a very good question. I believe that that there have been forces out there to undermine effective treatment. That's sadly the case, and that we get deplatformed or censored on Twitter, on Facebook and YouTube, and they try to suppress the information even now, sadly, but particularly 12 months ago. And I think that the people who were behind, there are many different, the big pharma and major financial forces behind suppressing this to the benefit of their approach, and which wasn't a valid approach. We just continued on in the face of it all without any desire to go back and give up, and we never will give up. And that's it's so important that we get the message out like we're doing today. It's so good that we're having this discussion with all the facts.
Dr. Farid, so in terms of publishing this, and I know that Matthew is a very detailed, obsessive, looks at statistics, and he's a brilliant man.
Yes.
Has this been accepted anywhere for publication? Like, is this going to be a challenge? Because it's extraordinary. You look at those results, and who wouldn't try it? Like, why would people not try it? And what would stop people from doing this?
I don't know why they wouldn't do it, and it's except that they're just waiting for the agencies to give the direction for it all, and they're faulty agencies with people who, as you said, were not experienced with the condition, and they never see these patients themselves. But I think we're forging forward with. We definitely are publishing it in our book, and the book will be on the shelves January 1st, if not earlier than that. So it'll be published in the chapter with Matthew Crawford writing that is that's quite extensive and elucidates some of these issues that you brought up just there, Eva, that in a very eloquent way.
Is there any is there any research institution that would be interested in replicating what you're doing and testing it in a randomized way, or is it too late now because it's shown to be so effective? It's unethical to actually do it in a randomized controlled trial manner.
Yeah, I think it's unethical, and I think that these observational trials are as good or better than RCTs, randomized controlled trials. And there's, as I brought out in that one slide on HCQ, there are 296 studies that with 100,000 or more patients with benefit, with recovery, when given properly in the right dosing early on and with the right combination, so that they could be envisioned, or trials could be envisioned with using other agents in one group, as comparing the relative efficacy with these products that are coming from Pfizer or Merck. That'll be of interest to see, and it'll be interesting to see how side effects are with those agents. We know that these agents have no side effects, or minimal, I should say, and I think they'll always be used and benefited.
Dr. Farid, I have on screen here the hydroxychloroquine study that was retracted, and I believe you can correct me if I'm not wrong. This was a study used to basically discredit the drug last year.
I'm sorry, well,
can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it. I do see that, and I don't know the actual details of that registry analysis, but that's what happens if they may become focused on having a good institutional review board and informed consent being given with these agents. And it's not like they're brand new and never been tried. They've been out there for decades and decades, and highly acclaimed. So we never felt inclined to getting a informed consent, if we had, we would have probably had an easier track to getting a publication. But I think that's we just didn't have time. We were getting inundated with so many patients, and they get their prescription and then come back and give us their outcomes, which are all so good.
Dr. Farid, did you see much long COVID with your approach?
No, we saw very little long COVID. We don't have any of our patients with long COVID that are covered after early treatment. So that's another benefit.
You don't hear people speak about that at all. You just hear people tell you that, that's why it's so risky to get COVID, because you risk that. But you're saying that early treatment actually stops long COVID?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the earlier the better. And the long COVID is seen in patients that were in the other category of fighting it off on their own, or ending up hospitalized and prolonged hospitalizations, and then recovery with morbidities as a consequence of what they contracted in the hospital, and then long COVID occurring after that, or in some patients who recover from COVID, perhaps even without treatment, but then get vaccinated in addition, and re-experience COVID-19 symptoms from the vaccine, from the agents, I should say, that are triggering the production of the spike protein in people. So then they do have this abnormal carrying abnormality of specific monocytes picking up the S1 fragment of COVID-19 and having a long half-life, normally long half-life, circulating and triggering inflammation in different tissues, different organs of the body. And the Bruce Patterson work has elucidated how that can be corrected or blocked. And that actually may be very helpful for managing the cytokine storm and the advanced pneumonia in hospitalized patients, because of the understanding of the receptors that are triggering this sustained inflammation when the specific monocytes have picked up for a prolonged period of time the S1 fragment of spike protein, and that is a highly inflammatory structure that when the monocytes attach to epithelial cells in the lungs or other organs will cause significant inflammation and hypercoagulability, blood clotting in those tissues.
And it's something like, I'm looking here at our recommendations in Australia, and the things that are not recommended for use, apart from hydroxychloroquine and colchicine and azithromycin, is also aspirin. It's actually said, do not use for the treatment of COVID-19. This is the current task force recommendation.
Really? They're really not very bad, very ignorant of what truly is beneficial. And that's very, very worrisome. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I'll send you this. I'm just looking at it now, and yep. So, and with Dr. Bruce Patterson and his work, is he using, what's he using for long COVID? And I know that he's also working with people with vaccine injury who have a similar abnormality in their non-classical monocyte. What are the treatments for that?
Well, they're based upon the understanding of the receptors on the monocytes that are CCR5 receptor principally, that binds to a fractalkine receptor on epithelial cells, or in the blood endothelial cells, I should say. And the CCR5 receptor is able to be interfered with agents developed for HIV treatment, particularly a medicine called Celsentry or Maraviroc. And it was an agent that we never had great benefit from for HIV because it's a co-receptor for HIV infection as an inhibitor of HIV or treatment of HIV. But if it's used in safe doses in patients with long COVID, along with other agents that also perturb this binding of these monocytes, like statin medications like pravastatin, an old generic member of the statin family that are used for cholesterol lowering, and doxycycline and ivermectin actually helps in the process for managing this abnormal binding on the molecular level. And so it's an incredibly important breakthrough that he and his group have made in the and they have their website called covidlonghaulers.com, and the patients can register, and then they can receive a kit to do what's called the InsoKine panel, that is a artificial intelligence based analysis of the immune system in these lymphokine cytokines levels, and the results that one gets indicate that what can be followed in the treatment, the recovery from the long COVID, and what and eventually in a 2-week period of time that can all be corrected actually with that approach. Wow. And it may be applicable to bringing patients off of ventilators through when they're hospitalized.
I have a question from someone who has had post-AstraZeneca vaccine injury. And the question is about treatment for tachycardia and neuropathy, and also, just the safety of having a Novavax vaccine, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I would highly recommend the lymphokine, the InsoKine panel analysis in terms of how to proceed. But then one generally needs to treat symptomatically for those with agents that deal with neuropathy, neuropathic pain, like gabapentin treatment, and then other agents that can be potentially beneficial if it needs to cross in the blood-brain barrier for the management. Fluvoxamine is an agent that can be beneficial. But the main approach is to that now is really very, very positive is this identification of a specific perturbation of the immune system with that lymphocyte panel.
So that's we're able to get that from overseas.
I believe, yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's in their program, and their company, Incel DX, it's called, Bruce Patterson's company. They are international.
And I see Steve has entered the room. So I know, Dr. Fareed, that you need to go somewhere now. I just wanted, do you have anything else, any final words?
I like that.
Yeah, you're Cash, so I'm Cash.
And I'm Cash too.
My new
Hi, Steve.
hoodie, the cool.
Just in case someone's asking you, Steve.
I thought it'd look cool for a change.
Eva?
Thank you, Sherman, and
Yeah.
Eva, and it's great that you have Steve joining in.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Dr. Fareed,
Yes.
just before Dr. Fareed goes, if I could just a quick question. I want to commend you for the work that yourself and Dr. Tyson are doing in terms of the early treatment protocols. I heard somebody in the public forum put up a question. He said there's a narrative out there. People are saying that the COVID-19 virus is a hoax, it's a fraud, it doesn't exist. As somebody who's a clinician and who is in the field treating this virus, how would you put such a narrative to rest?
Well, I think it's quite clear cut that it exists, and it's isolated, just like HIV was isolated, and it's a member of a family of viruses. It's very highly mutable, and it was genetically engineered. What plagued the world, and it's so tragic that took place. But the evidence for it is the results of all the diagnostic testing that we have for the DNA, the genetic sequences, as well as the proteins of the virus, and the fact that it's very typical of these respiratory viruses that occur, but it was engineered to become very, very potent and dangerous, and hopefully, I wish, glad they didn't make it more dangerous than it is. But that's that type of claim that it's a hoax is like the claim that HIV is not caused by the retrovirus that it is caused by, and other viral infections are not caused. There's just no doubt that it is real, and that is, and we need to hold these people accountable for what they've done. And we know just like we need to hold our agencies accountable for what they've done to prevent ending the pandemic when it could have been ended, and not recognizing all the great agents that we have that are safe and used so powerfully to allow people to have good, healthy, long lives.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
I just wanted the audience out of somebody who is actually treating the results of this virus. And
thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Right.
You're very welcome. Thank you again for having me on with you today.
Thank you for joining us. We are so grateful and so happy to share this.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for your work.
And thanks for the great work as well. Yes.
You're very welcome.
And I think your book sounds like the perfect Christmas gift for everyone. Holidays.
Yeah, and we acknowledge Steve, of course, in our book, the Tyson Fareed book, and he and a number of other people have stood out.
So you're going to call it the Kirsch Fareed protocol, right?
I'd like to. I would with the fluvoxamine, HCQ, ivermectin. Absolutely. That's and Eva was asking Steve about what to offer in Australia, and I said fluvoxamine should be offered. If they ban HCQ and ivermectin, even if they didn't, they should. That would be so effective in the multi-drug sequence therapy. And so I hope that that can be considered in Australia, but they should never be continuing this process. And they make it so difficult in Western Europe for these agents to be obtained. But famotidine, vitamin D, fluvoxamine, zinc, aspirin should all be part of a good treatment. And people should know that they'll feel better and they won't go on to suffering and agonizing states.
Have you tried Benadryl and lactoferrin at all? Because that's I read a paper recently on that 99% reduction.
Really?
But it wasn't an in vivo study, as I recall.
No, I haven't. We've tried cyproheptadine, and use that for intensifying. But and I think Benadryl is a very good idea. I'd like to consider that. Shall.
Yeah, I'll shoot you the link if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, I'd like to see it. Thank you, Steve. So
that would be great, Steve.
Okay.
Thanks together.
I've been enjoying here. Steve, have a good evening. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Okay.
All right,
Thank
take care.
you.
See how
Hey, Steve,
Well,
how's it going?
That was completely awesome.
Isn't he amazing? And the research and the data is extraordinary, and it's just so frustrating to not be able to share that with patients here in Australia, that people that, we can't get that. Very frustrating. But I think Steve has a plan B for us.
Yes. We have been pretty much clamped down here in Trinidad and Tobago as well in terms of offering alternative treatment. But we're going to have a presentation coming up from I keep saying Dr. Right? And Dr. Steve Kirsch is a MIT engineer, inventor of many of the things we use today with our computers, the optical mouse. And he's a Silicon Valley giant. He's been doing great things in that field. But he is now tensions on things like the early treatment protocols. And he's the president and founder of the COVID Early Treatment Fund. And he's also actively involved in financing and seeking to discover new drugs for the treatment of early treatment of COVID-19. I'm hearing rumblings, Steve, that the drug that you sponsored, fluvoxamine, has come through the trials successfully. Is that correct?
That is correct, but unfortunately, that doesn't mean that anyone's going to use it. But yeah, no, it works.
Well,
we knew it. Yeah, we knew it was going to work very early on.
Okay.
Yeah, but,
but I know that
a year later. Okay, so yeah.
Okay, you're free to go, Steve. The floor is yours.
Okay, so we showed that it worked back in. I learned about it in August of last year. And then it got published in November, and then it got replicated shortly after it was published in November. And at that point, you could look at the mathematics and you would say that, well, there's no way this thing can't work. There were no confounders or biases that could have explained the result. And so it was obvious to me that this thing should be used, because there's no downside of using this drug if it's properly prescribed. And the upside was 100% reduction in hospitalization from the studies. And even if it was only 90%, then you're still way ahead. And so doctors basically said, well, we don't like to look at anything like that because it might be confounded and might have biases, and we need replication before we're going to do anything, because after all, if the logic is that we don't want to be embarrassed if we give some people a drug that doesn't work. So it's not about saving lives, it's about being embarrassed. But it turned out that wasn't the reason at all. It was confirmed. It took a year to confirm it in the Together trial. So it was confirmed. It has a 12 times death benefit in terms of reducing the number of deaths by a factor of 12. Now, the vaccine reduces death by a factor of 2, according to the according to Pfizer's own 6-month phase 3 clinical trial, double-blind, randomized control trial. Pfizer reduced it by a factor of 2.
Can you explain
Fluvoxamine
that? Can you
reduces
explain
it by a factor of 12. So what does the world do about it? Absolutely nothing. Totally ignores it because that would mess up the EUAs for the vaccine. We can't have that happening. So basically, fluvoxamine is just ignored totally by the, you can go on the NIH website, and the fact that a key opinion leader panel met in January, and it took them a year to get that recommendation published that the doctor should use fluvoxamine. It took a year. 10 journals rejected this. 10 journals rejected fluvoxamine. And, it works. So it finally got published. That key opinion leader letter finally got published. And then, of course, the trial came out. But what does the NIH do? And what does the World Health Organization do? And what does the Gates Foundation do when they find out that fluvoxamine can reduce death by a factor of 12? Answer, absolutely nothing. They didn't even acknowledge that this study came out and reduced death by a factor of 12. That doesn't even make it doesn't even merit a mention on the NIH page on fluvoxamine. You can go there right now. It was last updated in April of this year. It contains none of that. These guys knew months ahead. All three organizations, the WHO, the Gates Foundation, and the NIH knew well before this paper came out that fluvoxamine was going to be very successful. Paper finally got published. They could say, oh, well, we're not going to do anything until it's published. And when it's published, they did absolutely nothing. There is no doubt. There should be no doubt in anyone's mind that this is a corrupt system.
Steve, do you want to explain the difference between a factor of 2 and a factor of 12 for the audience?
Oh, a factor of, well, in raw numbers, it means that instead of saying 800,000 deaths in the United States, I guess we're somewhere close to that now in terms of the COVID deaths. And it's not really 800,000 deaths because these are people who died with COVID, not necessarily from COVID. But let's say it's 800,000 deaths, and we'll take it at face value and believe the CDC. Then a factor of 2 means you saved 400,000 lives. If you, actually, it's not even that high, but a factor of 2 would be 400,000, and a factor of 12 would be, in this case, 800, close to 800,000 lives, and so 700,000 lives. So it's a difference in this case of, 300,000 lives. That's a lot of lives. And it basically turns a disaster of COVID into something that kills about as many people as influenza does per year. And that's influenza is not seen as something that we wear masks to protect against, or have closures or lockdowns or testing or any of this stuff. So fluvoxamine alone, solution could be a huge solution to the pandemic. Are you guys still seeing me? I'm getting this error message.
I'm still seeing you. It's just the chat. It's just in the chat.
Oh, okay. So anyway, yeah. So, but if you actually look at the clinical trial, what it said was that the death rate, the number of people saved, is one person out of every 22,000 who's fully vaccinated. That means when you vaccinate in the US and you vaccinate 220 million people, which we're approaching, that we're going to save 10,000 lives. 10,000 lives, would be saved by the vaccine versus a factor of 12 reduction, which would be, 750,000. So it's probably more appropriate to compare the 700,000 that fluvoxamine might have saved versus the 10,000 or so lives that might be saved by the vaccine. So, that's a factor of 70. That's huge. 700,000 versus 10,000. That's a big difference. But these guys don't care, and they won't be held accountable. And nobody's asking them any questions about this stuff. It's really, it's really pretty stunning.
You've been frustrated. When I first met you earlier this year, you had been vaccinated, and you were thinking that the research was going to be published. You were putting a lot of time and money into the early treatment fund, and you had positive thoughts that what you were doing was going to be translated into action. What happened since then for you? Because you've been on a huge emotional journey.
So number one was the letdown on fluvoxamine, because people said, hey, if you do this, this is the fastest, cheapest, safest way to end the pandemic, to actually discover a drug which can reduce death rate by a factor of 12. And for people to totally ignore it through all stages with all of the evidence and all the supporting evidence is unbelievable. I mean, it opened my eyes to the corruption in the medical community, and it's not just in academia. Medical academia is not speaking out about this, and it's also in, of course, the three other agencies: the FDA, the CDC, and the NIH. And of course, those people, when they make decisions, they impact the rest of the world. So it's really important what these people do. So that was a huge disappointment and an eye opener. And then the next thing, of course, was the vaccines. That I was doubly vaxxed and my family was doubly vaxxed, and then we find out a month later that we have friends that died or were permanently disabled after the vaccine. And I started looking into it, and I was appalled by what I found. I basically found that we were lied to in inducing us to get the vaccine. And these vaccines are like close to 1,000 times more dangerous than the smallpox vaccine, which formerly used to be the leader in terms of the most dangerous vaccine in human history. So this is, I was pretty appalled that there's all this data and nobody's looking at the data. They're all just trusting the authorities, and nobody wants to look at the primary data sources on this that shows the number of lives that have been lost or injured by these vaccines. And then to compound it even more is recently when I happened to sit down with the president of the California chapter of the Children's Health Defense, and I was saying, hey, what's the safest vaccine out there? I'm kind of curious as to if there's a safe vaccine, like what is considered the safest vaccine, and she said, well, they're actually all really dangerous, and it turns out that they're all going to make you sicker than if you didn't take the vaccine in the first place. So in general, the numbers are that if you take the childhood vaccines, that the kids end up being less healthy than if they weren't vaccinated at all. And the data is like super clear on this, but it's been suppressed for all these years. And the CDC has violated federal law in not making these safety assessments every year, because they know that these vaccines are super unsafe, and they don't want anyone to know it, because then that would just, destroy the monopoly of the drug companies giving them vaccines. So it's been pretty, let's just say it's been pretty eye-opening for me. in the last 7 months, starting when someone said, "Yeah, we got injured from the vaccine." It's like a little bit like opening Pandora's box for me, in terms of there are a lot of skeletons in the closet that people haven't been talking about, and these skeletons have been in the closet for 20 years, and these agencies have suppressed the science on this and gotten the papers retracted, unethically retracted, that show that how unsafe the vaccines in general have been. So, yeah, so that's my sort of the quick high level story for me.
And so you become president of the United States tomorrow. What will you do to make things better?
Oh,
for everyone?
I wrote a Substack article on that, and
Did you?
it's pretty long. It said it was a Substack article on how I would handle the pandemic. So it's just limited to that one thing, and there's like 20 or 30 bullet points of changes that I would make immediately. But the short story is, what would you do? I would do exactly the opposite of what the NIH and the CDC are telling people to do, right? I mean, it's like your plan to health to survive this this virus is to basically listen to what they say and then do the opposite. It's like, the Paul,
Seinfeld. Like
huh?
Seinfeld, when George does the opposite of what his intentions are.
Well, I'm
You
sorry,
saw
like,
that episode of Seinfeld where he does the opposite, and
yeah,
everything works out when you do the opposite of
yeah,
what
yeah.
you're
Well,
doing.
it's like, so like masks. You know, Masks are mandated. They'll protect you. No, they don't do anything. In fact, they're probably going to make you sicker, and they're going to,
Well, it
inhibit the
depends.
development of your kids, right? So,
Depends where and what. And I guess, like if you're in the hospital and you're a doctor and you're wearing an N95 mask, and, I guess that's that nuance is just gone from the whole discussion. And that's the problem. There's just no nuanced discussions anymore. And dialogue is not allowed. I know you've been trying to have debates. What happened to the world of debates, and how can we get them happening again?
they won't happen again. And in fact, they never happened, right? For childhood vaccines, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has been trying to get a debate on childhood vaccines for the past 20 years. Nobody will debate him.
Mm.
And when he finally got Alan Dershowitz, who's a lawyer, to debate him, then the host, who is the CEO of Valuetainment, said, we couldn't get any doctors to debate you on this. But we got Dershowitz. I mean, that's like saying, well, shit, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel. We couldn't go to we couldn't even get any schlocky physicians even to debate you. So now we have to go into the lawyers. And and so Dershowitz, lost handily, but it didn't prove anything because it wasn't, they didn't have any representation of any of the doctors on the other side of that debate. And the reason that we can't have a debate is very simple. There's this concept of mass formation, which is this sort of mass psychosis where people are in this belief system that the vaccines are safe and effective, and they're the only way out of the pandemic. And, there's this false narrative. And for them to keep that false narrative going, and for people not to revolt, what they have to do is they have to suppress the truth. So they have to take truth tellers like me and make sure that I'm deplatformed and I don't get an opportunity to speak to any mass audiences. I'm never going to be on CNN, not going to be quoted in the New York Times or on NPR or any of that stuff. They have to go and suppress the truth tellers. Because if the truth tellers are allowed to speak and allowed to connect with the public then quickly figures out, oh, there's something going on here. and the public objects and the whole thing falls apart. So censorship is required. And so when you ask the question, can you have a debate? No, because a debate would essentially platform the dissenters, and people who tell lies don't like to be questioned. And so the only people that ask Fauci, when Tony Fauci goes for an interview, it's always a softball. Here are the questions in advance. I don't like that question. I'm not going to answer that question or whatever. But he's allowed to escape and just answer these dumb questions. He's not being asked the hard questions like, hey, the law says that these childhood vaccines should be, they're supposed to be safety tested every 2 years. And the CDC hasn't complied with that law ever. And even when Kennedy won the lawsuit, they're still not complying with that. Don't you think that's a problem? Or, hey, there's studies that were done that showed that people who got the childhood vaccine schedule, they all ended up in worse shape very clearly than the vaccinated kids. How do you explain that if these vaccines are supposed to improve health and they actually do the opposite? I'd like to know the answer to those questions, but these people are just never going to be on camera to answer those questions. And it's like in Trinidad, I got the Minister Hines, had a nice little conversation with Minister Hines in Trinidad Tobago. And Minister Hines gets on and says the vaccines are safe and effective. And I say, yeah, but that's not what the data shows. And so what the radio station did is they cut me off. Right? This is censorship in action. There's a nurse that posted, and this is just really spectacular. It's a nurse, and she posted this one message, and it said, had dinner with a dear friend and oncologist last night. She said, we're seeing soft tissue cancers through the roof in 2021. 550% increase. Says she's never seen anything like it in 28 years. Said they were extremely concerned, but we know why it's happening, meaning it's the vaccine. So what do you think happens next?
It was censored.
No.
What happened next?
I don't know if you can see my here. If you can see my screen here.
Account suspended.
Wow.
Yeah. Account suspended. Here's a dinner conversation. Account suspended. This is what I mean by you have to censor all of this stuff so people never find out. And
what platform was that on? What platform was that on? Twitter?
Oh yeah, that's Twitter. Yeah. And so, the other thing I learned is that there are PhD scientists at Harvard who are not going to get the booster shot. Do you know what convinced these PhD scientists at Harvard not to get the booster shot? They're not subscribing to my Substack, which they should, but it wasn't my Substack. I can't claim credit for this. Do you know what convinced them? PhDs at Harvard. Anybody want to guess? So I'll tell you, this is, and these, and I'll give you a hint. This is our best salesperson. It's the vaccine itself. They saw so many injuries from people who took the vaccine. And they saw it in their research studies. They saw it firsthand in their clinics. They said, there's no way we're getting the vaccine. So it wasn't anything that I said. It wasn't anything that somebody wrote. It's just through pure observation.
Reality bites.
Reality, yeah. Yeah, that's our best. The vaccine itself is the best calling card that getting people to take the booster shot so that people can see what happens, and they're suppressing that pretty well. But the people who are giving the shots, kind of know what's going on. And the people that are seeing the repercussions of the boosters coming into the clinic, they're the people that know. And so they're basically saying, ooh, I'm connecting the dots, right? And what's connecting the dots for them is not us saying, hey, look at the VAERS data. It's them seeing direct results of people vaccine injured coming to their clinic.
And on the other side,
Steve?
we're also seeing the data of the positive data from the early treatment approaches. So I'm going to try and shift it to that, because that's exciting. And I guess it's just the balance of those two that we bring in the whole narrative, the censorship, the early treatment, the vaccine upside, the vaccine downsides. And I think that's the whole picture, because if you're an older person, and you've got lots of comorbidities, the vaccine makes sense. If you're a younger person and you're healthy, then there's a question, what are the options? And I guess up till now, we haven't had access to all the options, certainly not in this country. So I'm just wondering, you've got a slideshow, don't you, Steve, to share?
Yeah, I've got some slides. Let me hit the share screen here. Entire screen.
We have a lot of health professionals in Australia who are speaking out, and of course everything is being censored, and it's very difficult. It's a very difficult time for people when you don't know what truth is.
Yes.
And who is responsible? Who is responsible for what?
Yes. Steve, you mentioned something earlier about mass formation psychosis.
Yep.
The psychologists who are saying these things, they tell us that the mass formation psychosis is not just groupthink, but it's deeper than that. It's practically mass hypnotism.
Yeah.
And their conclusions are that they hypnotize. Now, Sherwin and yourself and we have and Eva, we have tried very hard to mount platforms where we can share information. They consider dissenting voices. My question is, what they're saying is that the hypnotized do not listen. They will not listen because of the heavy propaganda and censorship. So my question is, what else can we do in addition to mounting platforms where we continue to share this accurate information? What else can we do to break the spell that this mass hypnotism or mass formation psychosis seems to put upon the global population? What else can we do to shock them into reality?
Yeah. So can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. So you can see there's a picture of Paul Alexander here. You can see that. Okay. So there's an article here called "What is Going On and How It Will End." Okay. And if you click on that article, so this is on stevekirsch.substack.com. So look for "What is Going On and How It Will End." And there's an interview here. Let's see. With Matthias Demey, or I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. And he's from Belgium, and he talks about it in this this video. If you click on the video, you'll get
that's
that.
the guy.
Yeah. And basically, there's 30% of the population who are severely affected. These are the brainwashed people, and you won't be able to reach them. There's the 40% in the middle who are persuadable. And then there are the 30% of us who are immune for some, weird reason. We're not susceptible to brainwashing. So your job here as the 30% is to use a number of techniques to convince the people in the 40%, and then you're at 70-30. And then you have a majority. So the way that you do that, there are basically three kinds of types here. And let me here we'll edit as we go. It's the people who believe in facts and logic, and so it's sort of the three personality types. They're the people who are swayed by emotion, so they'll be swayed by personal stories. And there's a big group who is persuaded by a higher expert authority. So typically they're doctors, and that's the way that these are the sort of the three major decision-making paradigms for people. And then there's there are a number of techniques that you can use, and I listed 8 of them here for persuading those people. It could be getting a group of prominent doctors who switch sides, evidence of corruption, pointing out the authorities refuse to be held accountable, spreading the truth, such as articles like this one, using ridicule and humor. There's a guy named J.P. Sears who does these humorous videos, for example, creating parallel structures. So using Florida and Texas in the U.S. as an example of how you can flaunt the rules and do well. You dispel fear by saying early treatments work and reduces the death rate to close to 0. And so you can get rid of that fear component that drives this. And then it's action taken by as many people as possible. And so that is sort of the final technique. And that's going to be the most effective, is that people can't just sit on the sidelines and do nothing. They should all get involved in making a difference. So that's the answer to your question.
Excellent, Steve. Wonderful.
Yeah. So this is my my homepage. This is skirsch.io, and if you click on this article, early treatment here, then it has basically lots of information on how to treat COVID, long haul COVID, and COVID vaccine side effects in this article. So it's been you can skip to the section that's relevant to you, but it contains lots of different techniques for dealing with COVID. And then I'll just wrap it up by with a short slide deck. Is on early treatments, and you probably recognize the guy. This is when he's wearing a tie, but that's George Fareed on the left. And basically, if you treat early with one of these protocols, you reduce hospitalization by 99.76% and death by virtually 100%. And NIH totally ignored it. And we now know why. Because if the NIH had acknowledged it and discovered it, then they wouldn't have had the vaccines, which was their strategy all along. And so when George reached out and said, hey, I got this thing and it works, reduces death by 100%, NIH was not interested at all. It's like, we don't care. This is not about killing. This is not about saving lives. This is about enriching the drug companies. And so if you look at what happened to hospitalization rates when Japan adopted ivermectin, so it's pretty hard to explain how as soon as you introduce ivermectin, the number of hospitalized patients goes down to 0 if the early treatment doesn't work. And even if you just took aspirin after getting sick, it reduces your chance of being hospitalized by over 40%. So why are you taking a Merck pill, which might be 50%, but it's going to have unknown risks, versus just taking aspirin and having a 40% reduction in hospitalization rate from that? Fluvoxamine alone reduces the risk of death by 92%, and it was 100% effective in reducing hospitalization in the trials. But of course, they don't want you to know any of that. All of these drugs on the left, and some of them are supplements, have been tested in clinical trials. Some were a few trials. Some are like 2 trials, but number of patients is in the hundreds, and they have decent size effects. But they basically, people in charge need you to believe that mass vaccination is the only way out of this mess. And that's why doctors look the other way at the data. They believe, they trust what the CDC says, and they basically trusted hook, line, and sinker, and they don't have time to go and verify what the CDC says. They just assume that the CDC is operating on the level and is doing what's in the best interest of people. But if you actually look at the data, what you find is that the US deaths in 2021 have surpassed 2020's, despite the vaccine. Now, the vaccine was supposed to decrease the deaths. Hello, it wasn't supposed to increase the deaths, but it had the opposite effect. And we see this over and over in other countries, that the more you vaccinate, the more cases that you have and the more deaths you have. Early treatments, the benefits are there's no need to mask, there's no need for social distancing, there's no need for lockdowns, there's no need for mandates, it creates broader immunity, and it creates, it essentially creates herd immunity, because you naturally recover from getting the virus and now you're immune and you can't infect anyone. So there are lots of benefits. I won't go through them all, but basically early treatments are way, 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 way better in every single area than getting a vaccine. And then this is just a slide from the this Day with the Experts event on the November 20th. If you click this, if you get the slide and you click this, then you'll it's a link to the videos of, I think it's like 4 or 5 hours of we're new to 6, so it's 6 hours of talks, and some really great talks by Peter McCullough and other showing this amazing risk reduction without any benefit, any side effects. And so this is just a tweet that's referring to the 7,000 patients and not a single death. So this is George Fareed. If treated within 5 to 7 days of symptoms. Now you want to treat Delta like as soon as possible after you have symptoms, and it's a multi-drug regimen, including hydroxychloroquine. And so the point is that 0 deaths for anyone who got treated early. I mean, that is, it's like, have you ever heard of anyone who got treated early with a proven early treatment protocol ever die from COVID? The answer is no. And so why is the NIH ignoring all this data? Because the objective of the NIH is not saving lives. The objective of the NIH is to make money for big pharma. And so all of this life-saving stuff is irrelevant. And this explains, finally, why George Fareed never got a return phone call when he called up the NIH and he said, hey, I'm getting these tremendous results. I'm saving lives, and you guys should know about it. They are not interested. And just as a final piece of evidence is Uttar Pradesh is now COVID-free. Now, part of this is reporting bias, but in fact, I have a friend in India, and he says, the ivermectin has reduced rates way down. It's not 0, but it's really, really low. And their vaccination rates are minuscule in India. So it wasn't the vaccine that did it. And if you compare this to Kerala, which has 3% of India's population and 67%, but 67% of their inhabitants have at least one vaccination. So it's tiny, 3% of their population, and it's heavily vaccinated. Their little country, not country, but their state, accounts for 65% of all of India's cases. I mean, that's astonishing. They're basically saying, hey, we're going to go with the vaccine. Look at us. And you're seeing in the same country, one state which says we're going to adopt the vaccine, and other states which says we're not. And the guys doing the vaccine are doing so much worse than the guys doing the ivermectin. So that is it for the slides.
Yeah, that was awesome, Steve. We really, early treatment protocols were going to be the answer. Sherwin's suggestion for this seminar is early treatment answer. And I think after hearing from Dr. George Fareed and hearing from you generally, and then specifically through your slide presentation, it's really becoming pretty clear that early treatment protocols are the way to go. And if only we could get breakthroughs to get that into the hearts and minds of our governments and our institutions. It's pretty bad here in Trinidad. But in spite of that, in spite of the ban on ivermectin, we tried to ship some ivermectin to relatives in the US, and FedEx will not ship them. Ivermectin coming into Trinidad is being blocked. In spite of that, many doctors and nurses in the institutions and government institutions are actually using ivermectin to treat patients on the table. So, and ivermectin is available here in Trinidad, and people are using it. I had the case of a young man in the US who came down with COVID, and he ordered ivermectin from an online pharmacy, and he was supposed to get it in 2 days, but it took 2 weeks to arrive. And you know that's not good when you're infected with COVID. So we were able to, from some of the information I've gleaned from you, Steve, and from Dr. McCullough, and from some of the Fareed Tyson protocols, I was able to tell him that there are substitutes that he can use, like there's quercetin, there's black seed oil, there's NAC, and I sent a list of substitutes for him. He ordered them from a pharmacy nearby, from a not an online pharmacy, but a pharmacy right there, and they delivered to him. Within 3 days of him taking those substitutes for ivermectin, he was completely better, healed, and got 2 negative tests back to back for COVID-19, long before the ivermectin even arrived. I'm saying that to say that early treatment protocols really are the way to go. And I thank God for the kind of pioneering work that you have been doing, and your connection with the others in the field, to bring this to bear. Is there anything else you want to say concerning early treatment protocols to drive it home to? There are a lot of people listening who are asking lots of questions. Anything else you want to just say? This is about the early treatment protocols.
Yeah, people, just go to that website that I showed, skirsch.io, and click on that article. It has just lots of information on early treatments, much more than I could say here.
Could you repeat,
just sort of knowing where to find it.
Could you repeat that site again? Okay, there it is.
Yeah, it looks like it's showing up on the screen here, skirsch.io. So you click there, click on the COVID treatment article, and it's there.
Wonderful. Let me just ask Sherwood if you would like to come on to take us to the next step, the next level. I know eventually we're going to get into a prolonged discussion. I don't know what else Sherwood's in mind right now.
No. I mean, the questions you're asking is the same questions I have. What else can we do? And I mean, the question I think I asked Dr. Fareed this question as well. What is really behind the suppression of all treatment protocols? Is it financially based? What's the real agenda? Because I've been observing since last year, since back when Trump mentioned hydroxychloroquine, and even before that they were trying to suppress anything that came close to treating. Some saying it's because they would not have gotten EUA approval for the vaccines, or is it because of money? There seems to be, from my assessment, and a lot of other people as well, and especially those who would have listened to the recent book, The Real Anthony Fauci. There seems to be quite a bit of corruption, and between the FDA, the pharmaceutical companies, and these alphabet agencies, and you have to wonder, they don't seem to be there anymore to protect their people, right? They seem to be all sold out to the big pharmacy companies, to whether it's to make money or for control. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that, Steve? I know you had quite a bit of battles trying to reach out to the FDA and CDC and so on. What's your thoughts on that?
It's multifaceted. That there are a lot of different interests at play, and it's a little bit like a perfect storm of special interests. There are some people who believe in depopulation. There's some people who want to get rich. So there are investment companies that have invested in the pharma companies. They're the pharma companies who want to be better off. And and who control the agencies, and there's Congress, which basically looks the other way and thinks that these agencies are all on the level, and they're not. So it's a confluence. It's a perfect storm of a bunch of special interests. Look at each one of them saying, "Hey, this is my chance to grab a piece of the pie and have this enormous transfer of wealth from the public to the rich." And that's what's happening here: is the rich get richer in this, and people die, right?
Yeah.
And which is really tragic. And you can't find a politician who is willing to actually be questioned publicly and be held accountable publicly by people who know what they're talking about. And so it's just a number of special interests.
I'll tell you, I'll tell you something, right? We have an activist here locally who was offered 6 digits to back down, right, on the pushback, because they're trying to push mandates here. Of course, he didn't accept it, right? So, I mean, while we deal with early treatment, and that's the main focus, you somehow kind of escape the push to vaccinate everyone as well, right? It's kind of intertwined. And we get the impression that, if people accept early treatment, then the vaccines become almost irrelevant. And is that probably one of the reasons as well why they're trying to suppress it? But I mean, the issue I'm seeing as well is that we have people who are vaccinated dying and unvaccinated, right? So my view is that whether you're vaccinated or you're unvaccinated, early treatment is still very important to reduce hospitalization and death. And we said before in this conference already that we are not getting the correct information from our health agencies and our governments to treat people early when they get a positive test or even if they have symptoms. And going back to even the testing, how reliable is even the testing? A friend of mine told me, a good friend of his had symptoms. That was a few months ago. Had symptoms, tested negative. They sent him back home, and he died a couple of days later. So they weren't treating the patient; they were just looking at the test. So I mean, Dr. McCullough calls it is it medical nihilism, right? What's happening? It's just the whole world seems to be turned upside down, and common sense seems to have left the room, and they're not seeing the elephant in the room. So I don't know what else we can do.
Well, it'll break. It's the elections in the U.S. I think will start to turn the tide here. When there's a new party in power, they'll stop the mandates, which will be good. There'll be less pressure, less death. People can then make their own decisions. That will slow down the rate of vaccination, and that will give us more time to get our messages out. And people are coming around, right? Because these boosters are just are the convincers.
Yeah,
they're our best salesperson. These boosters, they're convincing people to say, "Whoa, let's see it." They're giving me more of something that didn't work.
Yeah.
And it's causing people to die. And they're making the connection. Like this football player, super well-liked wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns, I think, dies at age 33. Football player dies at age 33?
Yeah.
You don't see that very often in the United States of America. Football player dead at 33.
And there seem to be quite a lot
and
of
they
those
don't
here
talk
as well.
about what the cause was. And
Yeah.
they don't talk about his vaccination status or when he was vaccinated or the fact that he had these seizures that started after he got vaccinated and then ended in his death. See, that doesn't get out into the press at all for some odd reason.
Yeah.
And If they had nothing to hide, then why not talk about that? So
And
I think it could
and
be
that
the
is
NFL players. I got in touch with someone who's in with the NFL players. Oh, just give me one NFL player, okay? And then I'll have 2, and then I'll have 4, and then I'll have 8, and then I'll have 16, and I'll have 32. And pretty soon there'll be teams that are refusing to get the booster. And it won't be one team, it'll be 2 teams, and there'll be 4 teams, and it'll be 8 teams. And the league isn't going to say, oh, okay, we're going to call off the NFL. So it's amazing that football players maybe are probably more effective than doctors, because see, the doctors can't speak out or they're going to lose their license. And we've seen this happen over and over again. And so it ironically, it may be the football players that are going to be the key to breaking this open.
I'm saying that, right? I mean, just a few days ago, there's a doctor in St. Lucia. She actually was suspended for using ivermectin. I'm supposed to have something with her here. If I could pull the article up, I'll put it on screen. Just give me a second. Let's see.
As you're looking for that, let me just mention that, Steve, the incidence of top-level athletes collapsing on the field and dying, and the prevalence of athletes suffering strange circumstances has really become very prevalent. And so it's reflected in what happened to that 33-year-old NFL player.
So yeah, so we have this doctor here, Dr. St. Rose. She's suspended for the use of ivermectin to treat COVID-19. And when I see stories like this, it's really sad, because here we have a doctor who is really dedicated and more unlikely helping and saving her patients' lives, and they're being targeted. And and
Absolutely. I see that all the time. I was just talking to a doctor. He said, and I said, so wait a second. These doctors who there's no death here. It's not like she gave them ivermectin and then they died. It's that she gave them ivermectin and it saved their lives. And therefore, we want to take away your license to practice medicine because you aren't doing what we told you to do.
And I mean, you have to come to the conclusion it's not really about saving lives. I mean, they may say that,
It's
but
not about saving lives, my friend.
It's not about saving lives.
No, these doctors are basically, it's the opposite. If you use ivermectin to save lives, we will definitely take away your license to practice medicine. We don't want you saving lives. That's what the medical community is saying. We don't want you to save people's lives. If you attempt to save people's lives with ivermectin, we will take away your license to practice medicine. And like, if you've got this track record of, well, I saved 6,000 people from hospitalization, that's grounds for removing your license.
That's why I say the world is
it's precisely the opposite of what medicine should be.
Yeah. So it's not a Hippocratic oath anymore.
Nope, it's almost the anti-Hippocratic oath.
And it's sad.
It is, it used to be do no harm.
Yeah.
But it's like probably do no harm to the drug companies.
Okay. Yeah. Dr. McDowell wanted to speak to some things in terms of what's happening in Trinidad. It probably brings Steve up to date in terms of what's going on here.
I'm sorry. That what?
Yeah. Dr. McDowell was asking him if he could bring you up to speed in terms of what's happening in Trinidad, in terms of our numbers are going up basically, right?
Yes.
And they're still pushing the vaccines very hard. McDowell, are you hearing me?
Well, I know that. Yes.
Yeah.
I know that Steve would be very interested to hear what's happening in Trinidad, because Steve has had some wonderful Trinidadian encounters, and the tirade from our Minister of National Security on a public radio station was due to the fact that Steve was presenting data that the minister just could not handle, and he lost it. So we thank God for Steve's involvement. He's a legend in Trinidad and Tobago. And after that radio interview, I want you to know that every comment that came in on Facebook, on the radio station's Facebook page, was in support of Steve and in condemnation of the attitude of our Minister of National Security. And yeah, things have escalated in that, Steve. Our deaths now stand at 2,363 as of today. 2,363. Just 127 deaths, a number of 2,500. Which I hear we are supposed to receive a significant payout from the World Bank. There were 812 new cases and 22 deaths. And what alarms me about Trinidad and Tobago, you know, all of us have grown up with a phrase showing that that if you do the same thing and expecting different results, you're insane. And by that definition, if we apply that to the administration, the governmental administration, and the public health authorities in Trinidad and Tobago, we can make a plea for insanity. It's ridiculous what is going on. Before the vaccinations were introduced into our nation, public vaccination was implemented on April 6th, and this is the mantra that I've been chanting for quite a while. On April 6th, 2021, public vaccination was implemented. That's 7 months ago. And before that public implementation of vaccination, 145 people had died. 145 in 13 months from the breakout of the pandemic to April 6, 2021, 13 months, 145 deaths in Trinidad and Tobago. Then, from the public rollout of vaccination until now, early December 2021, that's 7 months, there have been 2,218 deaths. That means 6.1% of our deaths took place before April 6th, and 93.9% of our deaths took place after April 6th. That means after the mass vaccination campaign was started. Those figures, and I was hoping to have the graphs. I was unable to get through with the work because of some major commitments today. But the graphs they speak for themselves. From April 6th, there's a spike that has not stopped. And in Trinidad and Tobago, we have had a massive increase in daily cases and daily deaths. And the remedy of the government is still to suggest vaccination. And the pattern that's happening in Trinidad, let me mention to you, is happening also in Israel, in Gibraltar, in Seychelles, in all the heavily vaxxed nations. In 85 to 90% of nations that I have surveyed using the COVID Worldometer, there has been a spike in deaths and cases immediately after the vax rollouts. So these patterns all support the Gerd van der Bosch model that purports viral immune escape and says that this is exactly the scenario that will play out if that was the case. I just want to read from one of the groups that I have had the fortune to be in touch with is the European Union Parliament. You know, the European Union Parliament have become very activated and very sensitized against pushing back against the vaccine mandates. And we have been able, myself and a group that I'm with, have been able to get information through to them. And and they have actually gone on record as making some statements. But I want to read here a clip from a parliamentary representative, not a European Union parliamentary representative, but a parliamentary representative who submitted this in the Parliament of his nation. Let me just read some clips from it. The belief is that if we get vaccinated, this pandemic will end. But this belief is open when one considers the current resurgence of COVID in highly vaccinated countries. According to the BBC, infections have spiked in Seychelles, reputedly the most vaccinated country in the world. Mauritius is now imposing a raft of new curbs and health protocols, despite having one of the highest vaccination rates in the world. The Cayman Islands, with a population of 65,720, had 751 new cases in a day. even though 83.2% of its population is fully vaccinated. The Dutch government just announced a further lockdown after 16,000 new cases in one day were recorded in one day, even though 84% of Dutch adults have been fully vaccinated. These are alarming statistics. Despite a high vaccination rate, Germany and Italy are also confronting a surge in cases, and the World Health Organization is warning that Europe is once again the epicenter of the pandemic, and the European nations are heavily vaccinated. Yet, in contrast to that, the state of Uttar Pradesh in India, which has a population of 240 million and only 20% of its population fully vaccinated, reportedly less than 10 new cases per day. And so these facts really stand out to demonstrate that the vaccinations are simply not working. And just a few more lines from this parliamentary submission. We are not seeing a reduction in the spread of the virus where communities are vaccinated. And in fact, most governments have adopted what he calls a monochromatic approach. I love that term. In other words, it's a horse wearing because it's just a monochromatic approach. And he goes on to say, I am skeptical about government's religious reliance on the WHO and what I regard as questionable guidance and protocols. I am skeptical about closed-mindedness, which excludes and withholds other viable treatments. I am skeptical about vaccine coercion, especially where children and those who have recovered from COVID naturally are required to be vaccinated. I am skeptical about hailing vaccines as the only proven solution when the reported attributes keep changing. So he goes on and on, and I think this is a parliamentary submission and it says to me that parliamentarians in Europe, in the Caribbean, and in other parts of the world are waking up. I know that in the United States, a lot of the Republican senators, Rand Paul and a number of others, have come out against the vaccinations very strongly. And one thing the Republican Party is doing that's very good right now, that they're standing against vaccine mandate, and they're doing their best to expose, the lies and the errors and the corruption that is happening at the CDC and the FDA and the WHO levels. That our international health regulators are definitely compromised and are doing everything in their power to suppress and to hinder and to stop the truth, real information, the real science from going forth. So for this reason, I thank God for people like Sherwin. I consider my meeting with Sherwin to be absolutely providential, God ordained, God orchestrated. And I thank God that through him, we've been able to mount some platforms, or with him, I should say, with him and through him, we've been able to mount some powerful platforms to share this kind of information. It's wonderful to have been connected with you, Steve, and to hear what you have accomplished in the months that you have your mind. According to the Belgian psychologists, I think you would be in the 30% that could not be brainwashed, because from the time you heard the information, even though you were vaccinated, you immediately began to look at the truth, and you immediately began to question the truth and to realize that thing was wrong, and look at where it has led you. And I think I know I consider Sherwin and yourself to be tireless, indefatigable, in spirits who are just pressing on with this. Sometimes I have to beg Sherwin for time out. Amen. But I want to thank God for all that has been happening, all that we have been doing, and I think it's bearing fruit. I think God is continuing to open up platforms to allow us to get the light into. I believe that the wall is cracking, and I have no doubt. I'm very optimistic about the fact that it's come down and it's going to come crashing down, and I believe that's not very far away. I believe somewhere between the first quarter of 2022, we're going to see drastic changes. And so Trinidad and Tobago is in a place right now where we were surprised that the government didn't lock down the country as a result of the increased deaths. And let's see where do we go from here. It's possible that the government cannot afford anymore to lock down the country because of the kind of the economic fallout that we may have. So I believe we continue to press through. Major doors are gonna open. Let me just share one more thing before I hand back to Sherwin. we had a very significant breakthrough in Trinidad. The Trinidad and Tobago Council of Evangelical Churches, whose president is Dr. Desmond Austin. And let me let you know that Dr. Desmond Austin has recently also been elected president of the Caribbean Council of Evangelical Churches. So his is a very significant portfolio. We had a very powerful meeting a couple Mondays ago, and every one of the major denominational leaders and pastors in the nation was sharing their heart about what they thought about the whole vaccine scenario. And it went unbelievably well. Of course, there was, as somebody would say, there was robust discussion, and there were people on both sides of the fence. But at the end of the day, something significant happened. The Council of Evangelical Churches in Trinidad played a video clip, and that video clip was of a gentleman called Bishop Kendall J. Augustine, who was the head of the Pawi churches of St. Lucia. They made a public statement that went viral. It was put on a video, and it literally went global, because their stance was very much saying that they are against vaccine mandates and very pro the early treatment protocols and giving the early treatment medications, the sequenced oral multi-drug therapy, giving it a chance to have an effect to save lives and to people from going into hospital. That video clip was played at the end of that TTCEC meeting, and I was very heartened to hear that. And in the light of that meeting, the Trinidad and Tobago Council of Evangelical Churches crafted a statement, and there was another meeting, and it was ratified. And then a couple of days ago, Dr. Desmond Austin, the president of the TTCEC, had a press conference and made a public statement that clearly said that the churches, the church bodies in Trinidad and Tobago are against mandatory vaccinations. In addition to that, they are for the early treatment protocols, that vaccination should not be the only recourse, and not believe in the philosophy of safe zones, and the church should not be a safe zone. So I consider that to have been a major victory. And I am praying that our governmental administration takes note, our public health authorities in Trinidad and Tobago take of that significant development. And we continue to pray for the nation, of course. And I know there are many Trinidadians on the chat who are commenting actively. And I want you to know that this gentleman in the United States, are you in California right now, Steve? Yeah, from California.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Steve Kirsch is on our side. I mean, he's wanting to see the treatment protocols happen. He's wanting to see our governments take a stance that the vaccine mandate is not the way to go. It's not only about vaccines. It's about early treatment protocols like ivermectin, fluvoxamine, which is a drug that Steve has championed. And let's continue to press toward the mark, as the scripture says. Let's continue to press to the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ. And there is going to be a reward. I'm optimistic that we will be victorious. Let me just quote one more scripture to titillate your imagination. My Bible tells me that it says, "Thanks be unto God, who always causes us to triumph in Christ Jesus." So I pronounce triumph over our efforts. So I thank Steve, I thank Sherwin for the fantastic job that they're doing. So let me hand back over to Sherwin.
Yes, thank you, Sir McDowell. And I wanted to mention one more thing in terms of
Sure.
the early treatment. You had shown the stats, I believe, for Japan, right, Steve? On your slides.
Sorry, that what? In Japan?
On your slides, you had
Yeah.
I believe, a slide for Japan, right?
Yeah.
Now, what I want to comment on, remember that I believe was the head of the Tokyo Medical Association, after looking at the data in Africa, and in particular, I guess sub-Saharan Africa and so on, made the connection that, here, what, how come these countries with such low vaccination rates have such low numbers of COVID? And of course, we know what the answer was, right? It's ivermectin and things like ACQ, right? There's a correlation there, right? And as we have seen in the data, when they pushed for that in Japan, their numbers went down significantly as well. So, I mean, the data is out there for all who wants to see, and who are interested in saving lives. And it's up to us to share. There's only so much we can do. But I mean, we're going to be wrapping up now in a couple of minutes, unless we have any other questions. And I really want to give Steve a vote of thanks. Steve has been a real champion in this fight from the beginning. And I see he's intensifying his efforts. You can check out his Substack. You can check out stevekirsch.io. Steve is now the president of the Vaccine Safety Research Organization. And every Thursday now runs a Zoom meeting, a Zoom webinar where doctors are interviewed. Last week it was Dr. Malone, right? And every week we look forward now to that, Steve, another exciting interview with a top doctor or scientist on the pandemic. We want to really thank you for that effort. Pastor McDowell as well has been a real foundation here in Trinidad on the spiritual realm and on the physical, supporting the effort as well. And I want to thank you, everyone. And Steve, any last words before we wrap up?
No, just don't get vaccinated. Whatever you do not get vaccinated. And if you get COVID, make sure you have the drugs available and the supplements available on hand so you can start treatment immediately. And, there's a lot of stuff that's mentioned on my website. You can do nasal irrigations, you can take aspirin, you can use Benadryl, you can use lactoferrin. A lot of this stuff is still available. NAC, vitamin D, if you load up on vitamin D well before, if you just keep your vitamin D levels high, that is going to really, really help you out. So there's just a lot of things you can do, but you have to prepare in advance for this so that when you get COVID, that you're prepared either because you've raised your levels of vitamin D beforehand or you have the various supplements on hand to be able to address it.
Okay. So before we close, I have this last bit to close up. Go ahead, McDowell.
Sure. No, I was just going to say that, even though it's not being shouted from the rooftops, the same thing the doctors in Australia are experiencing and the doctors in many parts of the world are experiencing, Trinidad doctors are experiencing the same thing. There has been a gag order put out on Trinidad doctors that they're very quiet about. They will not speak against the vaccine, most of them. But we thank God that a few courageous souls are coming forward and being very forthright in terms of what they see happening. And I believe that number will increase. And I believe the cry will increase. So I just wanted to share that tidbit, Sherwin.
Oh, one more thing. I also want to thank our people behind the scenes. We have Karen in our Clubhouse room, streaming this to Clubhouse as well. Marta and the rest of the team there who are really a big support to me and Steve as well in trying to really promote early treatment and the COVID Early Treatment Club on Clubhouse. And actually, we're going to be continuing our discussion in that Clubhouse tonight. Steve is going to be joining the room and people have a chance to ask him questions there directly. So if you're interested, you can check out our Clubhouse link and get some more information. Yeah. And I'm going to close off with this nice really video here. Let me get the Clubhouse link and put it up first before for those who are interested. And I'll put it on the screen here. So that's the Clubhouse link for those interested, and I'll put it in the chat if anyone want to join us on Clubhouse as we continue this discussion on COVID early treatment. Let's see.
Can I just tell the audience, the listening audience, that what you see Sherwin and Steve doing here, they do many days a week on Clubhouse, and they are on different Zoom forums. So they're very, very active in discussing these matters. And I also wanted to mention that there's a Zelenko, Vladimir Zelenko recommended supplement that I have actually just a bottle of. It's available on Amazon. I think Dr. Fareed, it's BioZinc, or it's called zinc with ionophores, and it contains that particular supplement contains quercetin and methionine, an amino acid that helps in the chelation of zinc so that it can be easily absorbed. So I have a bottle of that, and I want to encourage anybody, get a bottle of BioZinc with ionophores. It's on Amazon. It's heavily recommended, highly recommended by Dr. Vladimir Zelenko. Put that in your armory.
Okay,
Put that in your pipe and smoke.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, as we close up, I just want
That's okay.
to leave us with this song here.
Yeah, I'm good.
You're good. All right, good. Thank you, Steve and Dr. McDowell.
Welcome to the revolution. We will not comply with the institution.
Revolution won't be televised. Government been telling lies. If you're not with us, you better step aside. Witnessing a genocide. Everything is centralized. The food that we consuming, they spraying it out with pesticides. Easily identify the sheep and the snake, the real and the fake, giving us a reason to pray. I'ma make my own choices. A voice for the voiceless. They trying to destroy us, avoiding the poison. It's all pointless if you don't have a purpose. If you read the verses, you'll know who we versing. Government can't tell you what your worth is. Look deeper than the surface. They don't even want you researching or asking questions. We all being tested. Shut your mouth, they comply, that's the message. Want you depressed on prescriptions that mess with your head. Got you stressing, suppressing expression.
We will not comply with the institution's sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution. We will not comply with the institution's sick illusion. No, it won't be televised. Welcome to the revolution.
Keep the money, I would rather have my soul. They want power and control, that's their number one goal. All my friends turn to foes, look how easily they fold. Even Nazis say they were doing what they told. Walking down this road all alone in the cold, but my soul never sold. I'm exposing the clones. God has chosen this role. All of those who oppose want me hopeless and broke, like I'm Noah on boats. I'm just trying to tell them all about the flood. I can feel it in my bones, I can feel it in my blood. Man, I came up out of mud, only God is my judge. I don't listen to these politicians, they the real thugs. Won't comply with the lies, they disguise it as science. They want you compliant, the media's biased. These corporate giants are capital